Where do the world's top data scientists and machine learning engineers think AI is really heading? How can you join them and break into your own data science, machine learning, or data analytics career? Those questions are what we're all about. My name's Jeremy, and welcome to the Mind the Machines podcast.
No matter what institution you're coming from, you can get access to the very latest research.
We also have to make sure that we're constantly revisiting our foundations and justifying why we're using the methods we are.
It's hard not to deploy you. It doesn't matter what field you're in or what is it that you're good at. If you're good at something, if you like something with passion, there is someone who really needs you.
Our guest today is Susan Holcomb, and I'm super excited to introduce her not only because she's the former head of data at Pebble, which, if you don't know, was the world's first smartwatch company and still holds the record for largest Kickstarter fundraise in history, but also because she's a mentor in the Sharpest Minds community, which is where we all spend most of our free time. Susan, thanks so much for joining us for this.
Thank you. That's such a nice intro.
Nice to have you here. Thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, of course.
So one of the questions that we had when we're talking about this, because you have such an interesting background, you've done so many different things. One of the things that really does stand out is that Pebble experience, in particular because it's a hardware company. And we spend so much time talking about software companies and how data science is leveraged there. And at least I find it a little bit harder to imagine how hardware companies leverage data science. So can you tell us a little bit about that and where the data science effort was focused at Pebble?
Yeah, so Pebble was really interesting because I was sort of the first data person in the door there. So when I joined, I had no team. We had basically an empty database and not even any KPIs for how to measure how the watch was being used, if the product was successful in the ways we want it to be, much less doing anything like building products powered by data. So I think there are sort of two interesting things that we did at Pebble that were, relevant to it being a hardware company and not a software one. The first challenge you have is that these products are out in the world. They might be on someone's wrist. They might be lying in a drawer just waiting for the battery to go dead. So one of the first things we did was try to figure out how we could tell whether the product was being used and for how long. And to do that, we had to get creative. The one of the challenges of working with hardware data is the data is not coming in a constant stream. So we had data coming off the watch that would be given back to us every hour or so in a roll-up of all the things that happened. And part of that included accelerometer data of how much the watch had moved around. So by leveraging that piece of information, we were able to tell if the watch was in motion. And it turned out that the accelerometer is very sensitive, and you can tell how many hours a day an individual is wearing the watch. Now, I know that when you get into the details of how data scientists work with data, what we actually look at, it always does sound a little creepy. But the reason why that was really important to us is it gave us all this interesting information that we could use to figure out what to do with the product going forward. One of the things we discovered was that about 10% of our population was wearing the watch 24 hours a day. I actually thought this was an error. I was like, that's weird. That seems like noise to me. I surveyed the office. Again, this was just me at the time by myself working. I just went around the office and I asked everybody, do you sleep with your watch on? And about 10% of the office did. So that sort of validated that it wasn't just noise. The data was telling us something real. And that was a precursor. Again, this was, before the days of the Apple Watch. Fitbit was out there, but they were doing things that were very different than what we were doing at Pebble, although they did end up acquiring the company a few years later. But so that insight laid the groundwork for the idea that we would add sleep tracking in the future, because we already had a customer base that was sleeping with their watch. So that was sort of the first interesting challenge and I think success of working with data on a hardware product. I think the second category is a bit more broad. Obviously, over time, we realized that health was a very important smartwatch feature that our users were kind of expecting, that they'd be able to track their steps, track their sleep, and even eventually like track their heart rate. So we worked a lot on problems in that domain and worked around building data-powered features that leverage step, sleep, and heart rate data. But I think the unique thing that Pebble was able to do was, because we had a robust app store, we could build our own data-powered apps, kind of little skunkworks projects, as experiments for what we could do, like how we could leverage the fact that you're wearing this product on your body all the time. So one product that my team built was a little app that it basically sent you questions throughout the day about your mood and what you'd done in the past hour or so. Like, have you eaten? Are you drinking water? Have you exercised? Just little things like that. You could customize it with voice input. Basically, we were trying to take advantage of the fact that you're wearing this watch right on your wrist. You're not having to take a phone out of your pocket. So you can give feedback in a kind of seamless way. So the fact that we had this unusual interaction model based on, having a wearable product, allowed us to collect this kind of intimate data set and then give each individual user feedback about, like, hey, here's how these activities impacted your mood over the day or over the week. So those were a couple of the interesting things about working with smartwatch in particular.
I'm curious about how you guys use the accelerometer to tell the difference between I'm asleep with my watch and watch on a bedside table.
Yeah, so it's interesting. This was very much, I have a physics background like all of you guys as well. So as a physicist, you're used to not having good data to work with, right? So I basically wanted to tell if I could find an inflection point in our accelerometer readings that would suggest to me that there was a break in what was noise and what was real. And so I basically just plotted out all of our accelerometer readings and saw that the graph made a weird little zigzag that suggested to me that below a certain cutoff point, I would say that the readings were noise. And so we used that cutoff point. That's where I saw a plot where, we're getting 10% of the readings
above the
are right. So 10% of people are basically wearing their watch 24 hours a day. So they have readings above that cutoff point for 24 out of 24 hours. And then I tested that I surveyed the office first, but I then sent a survey to a subset of our users and basically was able to see that my cutoff point was correct, 100% of the time. So we were lucky that we were able to distinguish between what was noise and what was just sleep. Not a sleep researcher. I don't really know all the details of how people move around in their sleep, but I was told that this does make sense, that there are slight movements throughout the night. So you can believe me or not, but what I took from that is it worked, and we were able to get good results off it. So
what I find fascinating about the situation you were in there is that almost everything you're doing at that stage is completely unprecedented, right? I mean,
right.
Nowadays we're used to all these stock data sets, human activity recognition data sets using smartphones and all that. Fitbit is a thing. But back then, you're having to do all the conceptualization from scratch to even think about what models to use. How is that? How is the process of just coming up with a draft of a strategy when there was no one else to help you and you were the only one there?
I think that's what really excited me about taking the job. I was doing consulting work at the time. I really didn't want to join a company, but when I got in the door at Pebble and I saw what a green field it was going to be, and that, there was a real need for this kind of systems level thinking that you just don't get to do in a lot of data science jobs. I had come from online gaming, and that was a great first or early career experience for me because you have a really well-developed analytic structure and a well-developed sense of how you use data to drive value for the company. But, I didn't get to invent things. I didn't get to make up KPIs or just, inform the executive team, like, hey, here's how long people are using the product for, like those basic things. I never got to do that. So that was what really attracted me to this particular problem or this particular industry. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges was not so much in kind of working through conceptually what data at a hardware company meant, but it was getting the buy-in from the rest of the leadership team that A, you can trust me and I'm doing things that are useful, and B, we should really make data a core part of the company. There's things we can do that will set our product apart if we can use our data in a smart way. And so, I mean, that was a journey. I definitely focused early on more of the analytics side of the business because I knew that the product team, even the engineering team, and of course, Eric, the CEO, they were all very hungry for that information. That was stuff that was going to help them. Those are things they can take to the board and say like, hey, here's all this great stuff we know. Here's how great we're doing. So that won me trust early on. And I mean, I think there's certainly things I could have done more efficiently looking back, but I just continued to push from that core analytical understanding of the product, just push more and more for making data a part of what we did, and getting more and more resources onto building products that would be, and apps or the watch that would be powered by data.
You're saying that you started out by doing some quick win type stuff where you were able to say, here are our stats, like here stuff is looking good, here's something you can take to the board, here's something you can look at with engineers. And then as that started to compound, you had enough buy-in to say, maybe let's look deeper into this. Maybe let's try to predict some things. Maybe I can have a team of more than just one person and things like that.
Yeah. And I think the other big motivator for me joining the company is, I mean, it was a really special company. The leadership just got it in a way that I don't think you always see. So I took a strategic approach for how I wanted to make my mark on the company, but I was also blessed to have a leadership team that really, wanted to trust me, wanted to support me, wanted to come up with cool new things we could do, and gave me a lot of freedom and support in doing that. So I definitely had to spend a lot of time getting clear on what I thought the value of every step I took was, but I didn't have to fight hard. I had a group of people that was very open to being flexible and trying new things and experimenting.
So you talked about this idea of building the team from the ground up, including even just getting corporate buy-in, or leadership buy-in, which obviously is like an especially big challenge when you're the head of data science at like this nascent startup with a new kind of data no one's ever worked with before. But one of the questions that I really had looking at this was, was there an evolution in terms of the company's needs on the data science side? Like, did you find yourself looking for different skill sets as the company scaled?
Totally. I think early on, I was really, really lucky with the first person that we hired because she was a generalist. She had a neuroscience PhD. She had started a startup right before she joined and sort of decided she wanted to be in a slightly more specialized role, but be embedded in a company. And so I got really lucky with my first couple of hires were people like that, and people who were happy to kind of dive into any problem, write SQL, just do the grunt work, like be in the trenches with me, doing the things that aren't necessarily so glamorous. But, the flip side of that is that they were motivated, and in the same way that I am, by getting feedback from people in other disciplines. So they got to work with the product team closely and the engineering team closely. They got to have a lot of autonomy. So I think finding people that can be that generalist early on was really important. As the team grew, then we started to specialize further. So the first thing that I did was hire devoted data analysts, because by that point, once you've given the product team a little bit of value, they have more and more and more questions, which is great, but it does take a lot of time to be running those SQL queries and making sure they have what they need. So we hired a couple analysts who be more sort of requests oriented, and to also get our dashboards up and running, because yay, we finally got started to have dashboards, which is a big moment in every startup's evolution. And then sort of the second layer of that was, as the company as a whole started to diversify the different things that we were all doing, whether that was beefing up the app store or starting to build out the health function on the watch. I hired more data scientists that seemed like they would be a good fit for those specific problems, especially in the health domain. We ran all of our calibrations tests ourselves. So we were strapping, beta versions of the watch onto like our captive audience of engineers and other employees at the company, and making them walk to get coffee and measuring their step count and seeing what it was like when they had a coffee cup in their hand. We had to recruit people to go run around a park when we were calibrating the heart rate monitor. So it was nice at that point to have devoted data scientists who had some research background similar to those kinds of problems, to work, full time on that stuff rather than more of the generalist product development stuff we had done in the past.
So when you're looking for, say, generalists to join a data team, is there like anything specific you look for? I find it really hard to distinguish the people who are good in a role like that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's hard to tell from, any kind of hard skill or a line on a resume. I think for me, it happened to be people with research backgrounds who were used to doing dirty work. I think that translated well into kind of a generalist role, but I don't think that necessarily always has to be the case. I think one thing that I did screen for was trying to get a sense of the candidates' motivations. Are they more motivated by kind of the impact they have and by having some autonomy, and I don't know, like a nicer way to say like feeling important, but I can say it because that's a big motivator for me. I want to feel valued. I want to have that person to person affirmation that like, hey, this was really helpful. And not everybody's like that. You can be really, really strong data scientist and just kind of want to be in your corner doing your own thing, or, be more focused on certain, engineering problems, things like that. So I think I put a lot of weight on what are the motivators for these people. And then I think the final thing too is, and you guys know this because I think this is something you strongly advocate for, is personal projects. So whether that's in the case of my first hire, having experience playing a founder role before, or just doing some interesting side project based on something you're passionate about. That this is kind of a broader comment than just for, hiring a generalist data scientist, but those side projects tell you a lot about what motivates the person and what they're strong at. So I think that's a huge advantage that I see with the mentees that I worked with in Sharpest Minds, is they're now able to showcase kind of who they are as a person through this project, that also shows their bona fides and shows their skills. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say like, oh, how did you find these people? How did you screen for these people? The biggest advantage was like Pebble was a known entity. It was a cool company. And we had interest from a lot of really smart and qualified people. So that's a huge advantage that I had at Pebble that is certainly not universal.
That's true. And I've heard this from mentors, like so many mentors before, when you talk about personal projects, but what it tells you about people's motivations, because there is a category of people who's like, oh, I'm into data science because I heard about it and it sounds cool. And like, that's kind of as far as the thinking goes, which is fine. Like that's the level of thinking you want to be like, maybe I should look into and explore this potentially interesting field and see if it's for me. But it's not the level of motivation that gets you to like, I want a significant part of my career arc to be immersed in this field. And so there's the difference between this kind of like casual interest, which you see from, I did like this Coursera project. I did like this, pre-prepared for me thing, and like something that's much more sincere. And it's like, I noticed this interesting problem that I have in my own life, and like figured maybe I could solve it with data science for myself. And like, here's how I proceeded as a curious, intellectually interested person would proceed with this like new set of tools. There's a big difference between those two sources of motivation. They matter a lot to a lot of people.
It's also funny how that ties into another thing, Susan, you were talking about, which was your employee number one and her sort of startup attitude. And Ed, what you've just finished describing there is like a series of problems that a person is experiencing for themselves and that they want to solve for themselves using data science. Kind of cool to see that reflected sort of in two different ways in this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is probably true for a lot of hiring managers at startups, but it's definitely true for me. I love to see entrepreneurial experience on a resume, even if it's something just totally silly that completely failed. That to me is like, okay, I kind of get how this person thinks. That's a particular kind of mindset. But I think the thing about the personal projects, like what it shows me, if I had to define data science, it's just looking for opportunities within the data that you have. And if you are not kind of willing to bang your head against a wall until you get a solution, you're going to have a hard time. And I think a lot of people new to the field underestimate how grueling that process can be. So to see that in a personal project always speaks really strongly to me that like, all right, this person is scrappy. This person will kind of go out on a limb to solve the problem in any way they can figure out. They can, they'll throw any tool at it that they have at their disposal. Like, that to me is an attitude that tends to work well. I think in kind of any data science role, but certainly when you're early.
I was going to say, I find it a fascinating point to make when it comes that you're making when it comes to data science in particular, just because from what it seems, data science is one of those few fields where it's not just that you're not sure that you'll be able to come up with an answer. It's like you're not even sure that there is an answer, that there are patterns in the data that will allow you to predict what you want to predict. And so in that sense, maybe it does have more in common with the startup thing, but it also sort of intrinsically requires someone to be willing to, as you say, bang their head against the wall without even knowing that there's necessarily a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is kind of a different sort of psychology from a like software engineering, say, or something like that.
Oh, totally. And I mean, I think this is why, people with research backgrounds transition into this role. It sort of is reminiscent of what you do in research, or even if you don't have that background, but you kind of have that mindset or that's something that interests you, that kind of aligns with what the job is like. I do think one of the things that I have had to learn in my own career is knowing when we've reached good enough and when we've hit the 80% solution. And that's something that, I always see people struggle with that. Yes, you can always build a better mousetrap, but at the end of the day, we're trying to add value to a business here. So we can't totally be a research organization. You have to know when to stop hitting that particular wall and kind of move on.
That's true. There's something in this also that's especially interesting in the data science field, which is like you because if you're a manager, you don't necessarily know if someone comes back to you and says like, hey, couldn't find anything. If that's like, if there was nothing there, or if it's like this person didn't look hard enough. And that's like one of the reasons why it's particularly interesting in this field when someone has entrepreneurial experience, even when it's minor, because it shows you, okay, like I can throw this person at a problem and like, it's not necessarily like they won't stop until they get a solution, but they're not gonna, start walking, bump into a problem, and then like come back to you with their tail tucked in their legs and like go exactly as planned, blah blah blah. They're gonna do some extra digging, and that's the key to this, because like you said, like there's no guarantee that a solution exists. So you need the kinds of people who will not stop after they hit that first obstacle.
Yeah. And I think, it's really interesting in this conversation. We're talking about a lot of personalities traits or just personal motivations, interests. And I think it's always a little depressing to me when I hear data scientists or hear hiring managers talk a lot about Python or technical skills. Like, yes, that's important. We know that. And I think people anchor on those because it seems like it's an easy box to check, like yes or no, can you write Python code? But for me, the most important skills are, I wouldn't even call these soft skills, but just indicators on the kind of thinker a person is, the kind of critical thinking they tend to do, and the kind of problem solving techniques they tend to use. And so I think that that is particularly hard when you're coming into the field, to have an idea of what those traits look like and how you can highlight the ones that you have, in a way that a hiring manager can really, will resonate with, because it's not just about being able to write the code. Otherwise, you'd be a software engineer.
Well, and then to piggyback off that, like, what advice would you have then to somebody who's trying to break in? Let's say with your background, because we're all a bunch of biased physicists here. But if you were talking to a physicist today and you're saying, hey, here's like the one thing that people are going to tend to ignore, but I'm going to tell you to focus on this one thing. What would it be?
In terms of a skill or like a strategy, what are...
Actually, let's do both. Actually, one skill, one strategy. If you've got them, no pressure.
Oh wow. Well, the strategy is easy because we already talked about it, but I do think it's building a personal project off of a real world data set, and having a robust online profile on either GitHub or through Medium write-ups. That just not that you're trying to become a Medium superstar or anything, but just that you can point an employer to, like, hey, here's what I did. That's my strategic advice. In terms of skill, I think, it really depends. I think the step before that is probably to get a good idea of what kind of data scientist you want to be or what environment you want to work in. I think that's really hard. For me, coming out of academia, I had no idea. I didn't even know what job title was appropriate for me. But I was sort of interested in startups, and I knew the things that I hated about academia, were kind of the bureaucratic elements. I wanted to get away from that. And so, I think there's a lot more information available online now, of just blogs you can read and different people you can kind of follow on social media in the data science world. So you can get a sense of, like, okay, what kinds of people are working in a startup environment, and even like subsets of that, like, what's healthcare like compared to online gaming? So that's sort of, I think once you have an idea of that, you can start to see how these personality traits, how yours align with the people in the field you want to be in. But if I had to pick one, the most important thing to me, and it's one that I don't hear talked about, I mean, it's sort of implicit, but is numerical intuition. I think it's really hard to test for, but being able to spot patterns, like ask questions about numbers that are getting reported. It's sort of hard to put into words, but it's something that you'll see people with physics backgrounds have been trained to have an intuition about how to approach problems that involve statistics. So to me, it's like, this is a step away from just your statistical knowledge, but it's, can you look at a graph and have something interesting to say about it? That sounds silly, right? It sounds like, I mean, it goes up and to the right, like, I get it. But just to use my accelerometer example, I was able to figure out what to do with that data because I could look at that graph and see the inflection point and say, oh, this means something. And I could actually, if I had it in front, it'd be a lot easier to talk about, but I could spell out in detail to other people looking at that graph what that meant and why this is a good cutoff point. Like, I could make a case for that. So that's the number one thing I'm always screening for. And I think if you are doing a boot camp, you're learning Python skills, you're brushing up on your statistics, just doing basic analyses like that and sort of talking through the evidence that you have in front of you and being able to make a strong case for a point of view off of something numerical. That to me makes a great data scientist.
And it really does speak to so much, including the communication aspect. And almost on that note, you alluded to the Medium thing. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about one of the really cool things that you've written a lot about, which is email. And it's something that a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of people are taking for granted. We all went around, we read your blog posts about this. We're really impressed by it because they're fascinating reads. So could you just take a second to kind of walk people through a little bit, like what you think of email, your email strategy, any of your thoughts on that?
Yes, I will try to be brief because, as you noted, I have written like 4 blog posts about it because I'm really interested in this strategy. But so I started writing cold emails, and just to clarify what I mean by that, just an email to a person that you don't know. I started writing those when I was trying to start a software company, and I knew what I wanted to sell. I knew who I wanted to sell to. I didn't have any way to reach them. So I did a lot of research on strategies for how you email a stranger and how you find, target the right person at a company. And through doing that with that company, I was able to get meetings with, huge department stores, like companies that you've heard of that have no reason to talk to me other than that I made a good pitch over email to the right person. So I advocate for taking this approach. I've used it also for consulting gigs, as I've just done, little whenever I needed to get a new contract, like cold emailing is something that I'll do. But yeah, so it's something I've advocated for with people that are trying to break into the industry, because we all know that sending a resume to a jobs website is just throwing it down a black hole. And I think that's true in any industry. The additional challenge with data science is that a resume doesn't give you a strong signal on whether a person has this skill set, because it is so interdisciplinary and there is not a well-defined path of how you become a successful data scientist. So cold emailing is a tactic that you can take to get your foot in the door at a company that interests you. So my strategy is, or the strategy that I give to people is to research companies. This is all, again, tailored to startups, just because that's my experience. So for startups, you would be looking on AngelList, finding companies you're interested in, doing research on LinkedIn to figure out who the hiring manager for that position is. You want to email the person who asked for the job to be filled, who is likely somebody that would be managing you or managing someone who would be managing you. So like a head of data, possibly a VP of engineering, VP of product. You can research on LinkedIn to find the org structure to find the right person. But I advocate for emailing the hiring manager, who's the boss, kind of the person that asked for the job to be filled, and not a recruiter. Because the advantage of sending a cold email is, number one, you get direct access to the decision maker. So why not go for the person at the top? But more importantly, I think the advantage of a cold email is you're framing your entire interaction with this company. So if you can put yourself in front of a hiring manager and give them an impression of who you are, what you can do, you're setting yourself up for success through the whole interview process. Versus with a recruiter, you're just getting to the initial phone screen. They're not going to be in the room past that initial stage. They're just facilitating the process. But the hiring manager is going to be telling, they put the committee together on who's going to interview you. They're going to be telling those people, hey, Susan, she emailed me. She did this really cool project about clustering on Twitter. She's got really strong this and that. They're already pitching you to the people that are going to be interviewing you. Now, this is all assuming you send a good email. So that's why I say email the hiring manager. You can see on my blog posts the templates that I use to send these cold emails.
We will link to those in the description of the
Yeah, it's so the website is datasciencecareermap.com. If you for some reason do not see the link, I feel like I'm an ad now, but
no,
that's
it's
where
great.
you can find it. But
Awesome.
yeah, but so, and then in the content of the email, it's really important to keep it concise, be direct, and present yourself. Don't be doing things like, I'm transitioning from quantitative finance, but I'm working really hard to boost my data science skills. No, you're transitioning from quantitative finance. You have all the skills to kill this job, So I talk in detail about kind of the attitude you want to bring to the email, but I'll break it down for you just at a high level, what I always do, it's 3 paragraphs, intro and conclusion. Those 2 are generally pretty easy. The one that is difficult and that you should tailor to every company you talk to is a little pitch you give in the middle. And I keep it to like 4 sentences. 1 is who you are. 2 and 3 are highlighting a past project you've done that you can link to. That tends to boost response rates if you can link to a Medium post or a very well commented GitHub of the project. And yeah, so that's where you really want to be showing, not telling, the skills that you have, and highlighting ones that are directly relevant to this job. And then the 4th sentence, and this one is really key and really interesting. So this is why I'm giving this long-winded explanation. But the 4th sentence is where you communicate why you're excited to work at this company. And that one can be the kicker, because it's your opportunity to show that you have an insight about what they do as a business. And it doesn't have to be complicated, but like I shared with you guys earlier, I said to Pebble, like, I'm really, actually, you asked me this question. So you were already having insight, same one I had when I interviewed at Pebble. I said, you know, what's really exciting to me about you guys is you're a hardware company. And I have no idea. Nobody has any idea of how you work with data in a hardware company environment. So what did that communicate to them? That showed that I had a high level understanding of the industry and how, my domain would be different in this industry versus ones that I'd worked with previously. So I was thinking at kind of this conceptual systems level already, which is good. And more importantly, it showed that I'm a person who is excited by unsolved problems. So you don't have to do something complicated in that 4th sentence, but it is your opportunity to really get across that you understand what kind of role you would be playing. And you can see the exact templates in the post, but I guess to kind of wrap it up, I think people feel awkward sending these emails. The reality is a lot of hiring managers solicit on LinkedIn. I'm hiring, email me here. They are desperate to hear from talent that can meet their needs. I think especially in startups, that kind of gumption is respected, and you should feel confident in just putting yourself out there and skipping the resume hoop and framing what kind of image you want to present and what you want to say to the person in charge.
Yes, I think we all 100% agree with everything you've said. It's funny how we coach our students as well on this kind of strategy independently, and independently there's a lot of similar stuff. You're 100% right. I mean, hiring managers are hiring all the time. That's almost why they're called hiring managers. It's not like, oh, am I going to bother this person? You're helping them crush one of their KPIs. You're helping them, go up to their CEO at the end of the quarter and be like, yes, I successfully was able to hire this many people. You're helping, them do the one thing they're trying to do in their professional life. That's good. That's good. You shouldn't feel embarrassed about it. You're 100% right. The pitch structure, you have to show the person what you've done. Definitely. Why are you interested and passionate about this company? If the hiring manager has written a blog post, it's amazing if you can say, hey, I read your blog post. What I loved about it was X, Y, and Z. When people do that to me about a blog post that I've written, I'm sure this happens to you too, Susan. If somebody reaches out to me on LinkedIn, someone that I otherwise would not, be open to connecting to, and if they open with something like, hey, I read your blog post, it's amazing, changed my life, whatever, well, I'm almost certainly going to accept their connection request because they went right for my ego, and I can't resist that.
Yeah, it's totally true. I think the door is open for you to take, I wouldn't even say take this risk, but take advantage of the strategic avenue of communication, I guess. But the thing you have to make sure not to do is don't shoot yourself in the foot by sending a bad email. I see people who are great communicators who can write great blog posts describing what they've done on their data science project that will allow their insecurity to just come through in little nuances of language, like the word but. Don't put but in your email, just change it to and. Doesn't matter. But, you'll see people kind of frame things in a negative way, or write sentences like, oh, I just a quick email. I know you're really busy. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Like, well, you're taking up my time already. I'm reading your email. So just get to the point, So yeah, I do think that, to be successful with this strategy, your content has to be right. And there's a lot of kind of good email, like good hygiene practices almost, that I think it's hard to learn. And when you're new to doing this. And the other thing too is like that pitch, you can hone that 100 times. You can spend an hour tailoring that for every company that you reach out to.
And it's worth it.
Yeah, it is. It is. It really is. Because, you're not going to get a yes every time. You're not going to even get a response every time, frankly. But, it's putting you in the room with people that, can give you a leg up. So it's really worth, figuring out how to do right.
Well, and another benefit to it that's sort of less immediately obvious if you're used to applying to stuff through jobs boards is just the feedback. I mean, like when you send somebody an email, as you say, what if your response rate is 30%? Well, if you're sending 10 applications by email a week, you're getting 3 people, 3 experts are looking at your resume and saying, hey, you're not a good fit for these reasons, and you can iterate on that feedback. So
totally, yeah.
Well, so one thing I did want to make sure we got the chance to talk about too, and we it's almost a tradition with us, is we reserve some time to talk about the future of AI. And I think as somebody who has almost seen the future, or at one point saw the future with Pebble, was way ahead of the curve on hardware and integration of data science with that, you're going to have a very unique perspective on this. Over time, we've definitely found that the tools that have been used in data science have started to get more and more not simpler, but more user-friendly. You can deal with higher and higher levels of abstraction. At first, you had to code your back propagation by hand. Now everything's handled internally. Then it was grid search CV handled hyperparameter search. Now we're getting to the point where Bayesian optimization is helping out with parameter search as well. And so do you see a continually evolving role for data scientists in the future? Or are we going to get to a point where data scientists are sort of more like truck drivers where they get automated away entirely?
I doubt the latter would happen, because I still believe that, the interdisciplinary nature of the job requires someone who is pulling pieces of information together and able to look at a data set and find opportunities in it. And I think that there is a level of creativity there that would be hard to automate. I think in terms of deployment, that's always been a difficult area for data scientists. I think partly because people that are attracted to the field are like weaker on that. And so that's one thing that I hope we will see continue to get easier. Right now, there's always sort of a tenuous relationship between data science and, either the data engineers that get hired to sort of pick up the crumbling pizzas of the data scientist code, or the broader engineering team who's trying to build out infrastructure for you to be able to send your models out into the wild. And I still feel that process is really kind of shaky. It requires a lot of human to human interaction. Like there's not always a set process for how you get from model to fully deployed model in a scalable way. And that barrier between data science and traditional software engineering is one that I've seen continually kind of get more and more porous, which is good. I think, So, and I think there's a lot of, not even necessarily that those processes need to be automated, but that we can have, well-defined structures for this is how you do this in this environment versus this one. These are the trade-offs. Like a lot of that I still feel is not well understood by people in the field. So I think that's the area that I think will just continue to improve so that data scientists can be more effective at what they do.
Yeah, it's sort of this funny thing about data science where everything is new, everything old is new again. And so I just remember, I don't know if you've seen the Fast AI or if you've done the Fast AI courses or checked them out, but I still remember sort of like parts of the course where Jeremy Howard, who gives the course, he'll say stuff like, yeah, and we're not entirely sure, like this thing is an open question and this thing is an open question. And he's referring to like really important, significant concepts. Like, they're not that far off from like just back propagation. Anyway, yeah, it's fascinating to see the field gradually explored and how much there is still to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me. I left graduate school in 2011, and the word data science was not even really part of the vernacular. So I do try to keep that in mind, that the field is not that old, and we are constantly finding new ways to use kind of the skills that those of us in the industry have developed. And I think still fighting over a lot of what the definitions are and how much you should know about X versus Y. So that's one reason why I feel like for people new to the industry, it's good to keep kind of a more generalized mindset, even as you pick up specific skills that, don't get scared away by one person's description of what it is that we do because it doesn't feel like it fits you. There's still a lot of debate about exactly what a good data scientist is. I think the important thing is like get embedded in a company and prove that you can drive value, and whether you fit the exact label or not, doesn't really matter if you're good, if you're providing value in what you do.
And is there a particular scale or type of company that you'd recommend to people who are looking to break in?
I think it depends on what kind of environment you want to work in. On the startups end, I mean, hey, there's a lot you can learn at a very small company. I started my career at a startup of about 50 people, and that had 4 people working with data in the domain that I was in. That was a great first job for me because it was small enough that I had direct access to the CEO. I was able to have a real impact on the business and solve meaningful problems for them. But I also had a team that could support me. I walked in the door not even knowing how to write SQL. I'd written Python code as part of my graduate research, but SQL, you don't do that in physics school. I had to have a team that could kind of say, hey, this is the query we use. I had to kind of learn it on the job. So I think if you do want to work in startups, it's kind of an ideal way to start. There's certainly arguments to be made for starting at a bigger company. If you are not someone who really thrives on independence and a sense of autonomy, like if you feel a sense of security being embedded in kind of a bigger system, there's a lot you can learn in those kinds of environments too. So it depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, well, I think that's great advice for anyone, and especially people early on when they're trying to figure out, what it's okay for them to move towards and what opportunities fit well with them. To factor in your personality, I feel like is a very undervalued question.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's, like you were talking about this earlier, like how do you know what industry to go into? Well, one important aspect is like what kinds of people are in each of these industries, and like do these personalities align with yours? And like are the kinds of people who are like you in this industry or that industry? That's like, I haven't heard that from anyone really before articulated, but I think it's totally right. And it's like, at first it might seem like, oh, it's so hard. Like, how do I know this until I embed myself in the industry? But one way that you can do this is, you can kind of do this on Twitter. You can go on Twitter and figure out which kinds of personalities are there in each industry, follow a bunch of people, and then prune your followers until you're following the people that align well with your interests, and then go, that's the industry that I'm interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest learning for me coming out of academia into the business world was like, oh, I spent all these years of my life in educational environments thinking that I needed to learn skills, like I needed to know things and know how to do things. And the reality of working in a company is a lot of business is just trying to deal with other people and get a group of people moving in a direction. Little did I know that MBAs exist who like spend years. This is a whole area of study that you can go and read research about how you get people organized and able to work together. But yeah, I mean, even in highly technical environments, I think business is still mainly about people. And maybe AI will change that. I'm kidding. But until we're all automated away, which I don't think will happen. But yeah, I mean, it's the personality traits and the types of people you're comfortable working with and that you understand how to communicate with have a big impact on how successful you can be.
I think that's a great note to leave things on, and a really fascinating discussion. Thanks so much, Susan. I mean, this has been like an absolute pleasure. So much content too on the email side. I feel like we've got a million things to link to, including your Twitter, which you're quite active on as well too. So we'll make sure to link to
that. Thank you guys. It was really fun talking to you.
You do.